strollers, diapers, baby monitors, everything is going up. Plain and simple, President Trump lied to the American people. He fooled them. He said to them, when they were in need, I'm going to lower your costs. And he kept lying and lying and lying and lying. Let's see what happens tonight. President Trump's going to go try to just make up some more facts and say, no, it's just your imagination. That beef's not 23 or 33% more expensive. It's just your imagination. There's less money in your checking account. No, that's just your imagination. It's one lie after another. Everything is getting more expensive. It's Donald Trump's tariffs, taxes that are just reaching, where President Trump reaches into the pockets of the American people. He's taking $1 after another. One lie after another. Enough is enough. On top of all of that, many of you have reported about the negative impact to small farmers and ranchers.
You see what you just witnessed because this is the moment when the entire narrative shatters into 1,000 shards of truth, and the gaslighting apparatus of the American right wing reveals itself in all its naked, grotesque dishonesty. This senator standing at that podium tearing down the wall of lies, brick by mendacious brick, while the ghost of every broken promise Trump ever made hovers in the air like toxic smoke. We are living through an economic catastrophe manufactured by a man who campaigned on affordability, while plotting to pick the pockets of every working family in this country through the blunt instrument of tariffs that amount to nothing less than a regressive tax on the poor and the middle class, and the evidence is pouring in from every corner of the economic landscape like a flood that cannot be stopped. Tariffs amounting to an average tax increase of $1,000 per U.S. household in 2025, while Trump stands before cameras spinning fairy tales about how other countries will pay, about how this will all work out, about how your imagination is playing tricks on you when you see those grocery receipts climbing higher and higher. The audacity of it staggers the mind, because we have just lived through consumer prices rising 21.5% under Biden, with gasoline alone rising 31%. And Americans understandably felt that pain in their bones, felt it every time they filled up their tanks or bought groceries or tried to make rent, and Trump swooped in like a vulture circling wounded prey, promising relief, promising solutions, promising that he alone could fix it. And what has he delivered? Trump's tariffs are adding to inflation and holding back families, while unprecedented tariffs are driving up prices on consumer goods and cutting into what families can afford, on hoard. And this is not some abstract economic theory. This is not some esoteric debate among academics in ivory towers. This is material reality crashing down on kitchen tables across America, where families are doing the math and discovering that the numbers simply do not add up. You heard that senator call it what it is, one lie after another, and the research confirms it with devastating precision, because despite the Trump administration's claims that other countries would pay for its tariffs, President Donald Trump's tariff policies are undoubtedly making life more expensive for Americans, with the price of imported goods rising about 4.0% between March and September 2025, while domestic goods rose 2.0%. And here is where it gets even more insidious, even more calculated in its cruelty. Americans will continue to face higher prices in 2026 if the Trump administration's tariff policies remain in place as in 2025. Many retailers absorb some of the administration's tariff costs, and several use temporary pauses in tariffs to stock up on inventories, allowing them to limit price increases for their customers. But each of these strategies is likely time-limited, and with Trump's tariff policies expected to remain in place, Americans will face even higher prices in the year ahead, as businesses pass on a higher share of the cost to consumers. So let that sink in for a moment. Let the full weight of that economic violence settle into your consciousness, because what we are witnessing is a delayed detonation, a bomb that Trump planted in the first months of his return to power that will explode across American family budgets throughout 2026 and beyond. And when families see beef prices that have already climbed to staggering heights continue their inexorable march upward, beef and veal prices increasing by 2.7% from July 2025 to August 2025, and 13.9% higher in August 2025 than in August 2024, with beef and veal prices predicted to increase 11.6% in 2025, Trump will stand there and tell them it is their imagination, just their imagination, that beef is 33% more expensive, just their imagination that their checking accounts are lighter, just their imagination that the American dream is slipping through their fingers like sand. And here is where the moral architecture of progressive thought must stand firm against the battering ram of right-wing economic malpractice, because tariffs are fundamentally regressive. They are a hidden tax that falls hardest on those who can least afford it, on families already stretched thin by decades of wage stagnation and the systematic gutting of the social safety net, on workers who have been told again and again that if they just work harder, if they just bootstrap themselves, if they just believe in the market, then prosperity will flow, and instead what flows is wealth upward, always upward, into the coffers of the already obscenely wealthy, while working people get tariffs and excuses and gaslighting. The senator is absolutely right to invoke the image of Trump reaching into the pockets of the American people, because empirical research shows that over the past several years, the cost of U.S. tariffs has been passed through entirely to consumers, and according to the Budget Lab at Yale, Trump's tariffs are expected to raise prices this year by 2.3 percentage points, costing American households an average of $3,800 annually. And that is not a theoretical projection, that is money being extracted from families who needed it to pay for childcare and school supplies and medical bills and housing. The farmers understand this better than anyone, the farmers and ranchers who Trump claimed to champion, who believed his promises about restoring American agriculture to greatness. And what have they received? In 2024, 216 U.S. farms filed for bankruptcy according to the American Farm Bureau Federation, a 55% spike over the previous year, while Trump has signed a $65 billion farm aid package, but farmers warn it may not be enough. Do you see the pattern here? Do you see the sick circular logic of Trumpian economics? Impose tariffs that devastate farmers by triggering retaliatory tariffs from China and other trading partners. Watch as following the launch of the Trump administration's unprecedented trade war, China stopped buying soybeans altogether, when China had previously purchased more than $12 billion worth of American soybean products in 2024, or about half the value of soybeans grown in the United States, then swoop in with bailout money extracted from American taxpayers, as if you are the savior rather than the architect of the disaster. And while farmers file for bankruptcy at rates not seen in years, while fertilizer prices spiked in the immediate aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But the situation was made worse by the Trump administration's massive new tariffs, which raised the cost of some fertilizers by $100 per ton, with new tariffs on steel, aluminum, and other metals, also raising the cost of tractors, combines, and other farm equipment, while making the cost of repairs more expensive as well. Trump gaslights them into believing that this is somehow in their interest, that this economic carnage is actually the birth pangs of American renewal. The conservative mind must perform Olympic-level gymnastics to maintain the cognitive dissonance required to believe simultaneously that Trump is fighting for the common man, while implementing policies that materially harm the common man, to believe that tariffs imposed by America hurt other countries when basic economics and overwhelming empirical evidence demonstrates that no matter what channel the price impact takes, it's Americans who are hurt by the tariffs. But wait, because it gets worse. It always gets worse with Trump. The cruelty is always the point, and the incompetence is always staggering, because Trump has imposed the highest tariffs since the Great Depression, with the average tax on U.S. imports today, nearly 18%, according to economists at the Budget Lab at Yale, up from 2.4% before Trump returned to the White House, and wild swings in tariff rates from 30% to over 100%, have also created challenges for importers, who typically order products months ahead of time. The chaos is not a bug, it is a feature. The unpredictability serves multiple purposes for an authoritarian personality. It keeps everyone off balance. It makes rational economic planning impossible. It allows Trump to claim credit for any temporary reprieve, while dodging responsibility for the structural damage. And most importantly, it creates confusion that can be exploited for propaganda purposes. You want to talk about what is happening to small businesses, to the backbone of the American economy that conservatives claim to venerate. Taxes on imported goods hit small businesses the hardest, with 88% of small firms relying on imports for the goods they produce and sell. Small employers and entrepreneurs, who are the backbone of our economy, cannot operate in such a volatile and unpredictable economic climate, and a recent National Federation of Independent Business survey finding that small business uncertainty spiked to the second highest level since 1973, illustrates this fear and uncertainty, while the disastrous effects of this administration's tariff policy will force the closure of these small businesses and the loss of the jobs and livelihoods they sustain. This is economic warfare waged by Trump against the very people who believed his populist rhetoric, against the small business owners who thought he would fight for them, against the workers who thought he understood their struggles, and the tragedy is compounded by the fact that many of them still cannot see through the lies, still cannot connect the material conditions of their deteriorating economic situation to the policies emanating from the White House. Now let us zoom out to the larger historical and philosophical context, because this moment requires us to understand how conservative economic ideology has evolved into something even more pernicious than traditional supply-side economics. how the marriage of plutocratic policy and authoritarian political style creates a toxic brew that poisons democratic capitalism itself. Tariffs in the abstract can be a legitimate policy tool. No serious economist would dispute that. They can protect infant industries or serve as leverage in trade negotiations or address specific market failures. But what Trump has implemented bears no resemblance to thoughtful trade policy. What Trump has implemented is economic vandalism dressed up in the language of nationalism. It is mercantilism reanimated from the grave of discredited economic theories. It is the weaponization of state power on behalf of an incoherent and constantly shifting set of political impulses, rather than any coherent vision of how to build shared prosperity. The senator invokes that powerful image of Trump reaching into pockets, taking one buck after another, and we must understand this as more than mere rhetoric. We must understand this as a precise description of how regressive taxation operates in a system already structured to extract wealth from working people and funnel it upward. Trump administration policies have raised costs for working and middle-class Americans through what has been called a Trump turbulence tax, which is the cost imposed on consumers and businesses due to the president's irrational, unpredictable approach to policymaking and running the government, with the president's pursuit of tariffs with its shifting rationales, arbitrary formulas, and repeated changes to deadlines, exemplifying how the Trump turbulence tax is disrupting nearly every aspect of the U.S. economy. The chaos itself becomes a tax. The uncertainty itself becomes a burden that falls most heavily on those without the resources to weather it, without the ability to hire teams of consultants to navigate the constantly shifting regulatory landscape, without the market power to pass costs down the supply chain. And while working families absorb these body blows to their economic security, while they cut back on necessities and juggle bills and watch their dreams defer, what is happening at the top of the economic pyramid? Rising prices may be contributing to a slowdown in consumer spending, which has fallen to about half of its 2024 rate from 2.8% in 2024 to 1.4% in the second quarter of 2025. And when consumer spending contracts, the entire economy suffers, jobs are lost, small businesses close, communities hollow out. But the wealthy remain insulated in their gated compounds while they preach about the virtues of creative destruction and market discipline. The progressive response to this must be unflinching, must be rooted in both moral clarity and economic sophistication, must articulate clearly that there is nothing inevitable about this distribution of pain and gain, that policy choices have consequences, that Trump's choices are inflicting measurable harm on measurable people. Think about the gaslighting component of this. Really sit with how psychologically abusive it is for Trump to tell Americans that the rising prices they see with their own eyes are imaginary, that the depleted bank accounts they check online are mirages, that their lived experience of economic hardship is somehow a fabrication or an exaggeration. This goes beyond normal political spin, beyond the usual massaging of economic data that every administration engages in. This is a fundamental assault on people's ability to trust their own perception of reality, and it follows the classic authoritarian playbook of making people doubt their own senses so that they become dependent on the leader's version of truth. The senator's mocking repetition of Trump's dismissals, "No, no, no, it is just your imagination," captures the insulting condescension of this approach, the utter contempt for ordinary people that lies beneath Trump's populist posturing. And here is where we must connect the tariff disaster to the broader Republican economic agenda, because the tariffs are not happening in isolation. They are happening alongside proposals to gut Medicaid and slash food assistance and eliminate clean energy investments, a reconciliation bill that would increase the cost of living for everyday Americans, while the Trump administration's unprecedented tariff policies raise the price of groceries, clothes, and more, a comprehensive assault on working people that will lead to about 20 million people seeing steep marketplace premium increases in 2026, with nearly 4 million more people becoming uninsured by 2027. And if Medicaid expansions are rolled back and enhanced premium tax credits expire, ACA marketplace premiums will increase by thousands of dollars each year, with a middle-class family of 4 with an annual income of $129,000 in Charlotte, North Carolina, potentially seeing their annual marketplace premium costs increase by nearly $9,500. Do you understand what we are looking at here? Do you grasp the full scope of what is being done to American families? Prices are going up because of tariffs. Healthcare costs are going up because of Republican sabotage of the ACA. Food assistance is being cut. Housing costs continue to climb. And meanwhile, Trump struts around claiming to have delivered the greatest economy in history, while his own supporters struggle to afford the basics. The cognitive dissonance required to reconcile Trump's rhetoric with Trump's results should create enough psychological tension to shatter the entire MAGA movement. And yet the propaganda apparatus is so sophisticated, the right-wing media ecosystem so all-encompassing, that millions of Americans continue to believe the lies even as the material conditions of their lives deteriorate. Let us turn to the farmers again, because their situation encapsulates so much of what is wrong with Trumpian economics and illuminates the path forward for progressive alternatives. A broad impact of tariffs is the uncertainty they are causing, with large questions remaining unanswered. The day before the Trump administration's tariffs were set to go into effect in April, including which tariffs were to be enacted, and at what rate, and this lack of transparency and coherent strategy has created uncertainty for farmers whose businesses require months of advance planning, with the current tariffs announced after farmers had started their growing seasons, making it impossible to pivot to domestic markets. This is not how you build a resilient agricultural sector. This is not how you support rural communities. This is how you create chaos that benefits only the largest and most financially cushioned operations, while smaller and medium-sized farmers get crushed. The long-term damage to American agriculture from Trump's trade wars may be irreversible because, for many farmers, particularly those who relied on exports to sustain their business, damage to trading relationships cannot be undone even after the Trump administration reached a trade truce with China, with U.S. pork producers having lost market share during the first Trump administration's trade war with China and still not gaining it back, because once a foreign buyer establishes a supplier relationship with a different producer, it is hard to win them back. Brazil is eating our lunch. China has diversified its supply chains away from American agriculture. Our reputation as a reliable trading partner has been shredded, and farmers who invested in equipment and land based on the promise of export markets now find themselves drowning in debt with nowhere to sell their products. And when Trump offers bailouts funded by taxpayer money, when he holds up those giant checks like a game show host handing out prizes, we must understand what is really happening. We must see through the performative benevolence to the underlying structural violence. In 2018, tariffs imposed on China resulted in a trade war that hurt U.S. farmers and required $61 billion of federal relief. And this time around, it's unclear if the Trump administration will bail out farmers with the government's current cuts to funding as well as federal staff reductions that will make it hard to administer aid, with assistance tending to be disproportionately focused on large commodity operations. So the small farmer gets devastated by Trump's tariffs, may or may not receive inadequate assistance that comes too late, while the large corporate agricultural operations have the resources to weather the storm and then benefit from bailouts that were supposed to help family farms. Every element of this is designed to accelerate consolidation, to push small producers out and concentrate market power in fewer and fewer hands, and this serves the interests of the corporate donors who fund Republican campaigns while betraying the rural voters who believe Trump's promises. The populist rhetoric masks a plutocratic reality, and until progressive forces can break through the propaganda barrier and help farmers see that their interests align with workers in cities, that they are all being exploited by the same ruling class, that solidarity across regional and sectoral divides is the only path to challenging corporate power, we will continue to see this pattern repeat. The beef prices become a perfect microcosm of the entire disaster, because beef and veal prices increased by 2.7% from July 2025 to August 2025, and were 13.9% higher in August 2025 than in August 2024, with retail beef and veal prices increasing for the 8th month in a row from July 2025 to August 2025. And when families go to the grocery store and see prices that would have been unthinkable a few years ago, when they have to choose between buying beef or buying something cheaper, when they have to cut back on protein consumption because they simply cannot afford it, Trump tells them it is their imagination. The senator mentions 23 or 33% increases, and those numbers are not hyperbole. Farm-level cattle prices were 26.5% higher in August 2025 than in August 2024, driven by tight cattle supplies from a cyclical contraction of the cattle herd, and wholesale beef prices were also 21.1% higher than in August 2024, and while some of this reflects supply constraints that predate Trump's second term, his tariffs on farm equipment and fertilizer and imported inputs have made everything worse. The entire supply chain for beef production has been hit by Trump's tariffs because tariffs affect everything from fertilizer to construction materials to tractors and new equipment, but not just new equipment like tractor parts, with all farmers doing their own maintenance on their equipment. So at every stage of production, costs are rising, and those costs inevitably get passed on to consumers. This is basic economics. This is how supply chains work, and Trump either does not understand this or more likely does not care, because the actual policy outcomes are less important to him than the political theater of looking tough on trade. We need to talk about the diaper and baby monitor and stroller prices that the senator mentions, because these drive home the cruelty in the most visceral way possible. The way Trump's policies hit families with young children who are already stretched impossibly thin, trying to balance childcare costs and housing costs and everything else. Young families are the ones who can least afford price increases, who have the least flexibility in their budgets, who are making the kinds of life-altering decisions about whether to have another child, or whether one parent should leave the workforce, or whether they can afford to move to a neighborhood with better schools, and Trump's tariffs are taxing them at precisely the moment when they are most economically vulnerable. Assuming complete pass-through of the tariff, consumers could expect to see the price of goods made in China and exported to the United States increase dramatically, with examples including a car seat from $59 to $120 And that is not a rounding error for a family living paycheck to paycheck. That is the difference between financial stability and crisis. The philosophical underpinning of progressive economics must be the recognition that economic policy is always and everywhere about choices regarding who bears costs and who reaps benefits, that there is no neutral market operating according to natural laws, but rather a political economy shaped by power relationships and policy decisions. When Trump implements regressive tariffs that function as a tax on working families, when he cuts programs that provide healthcare and nutrition assistance, when he rewards wealthy donors with tax cuts while claiming to champion the forgotten man, he is making choices that reflect whose interests he actually serves. The progressive task is to make those choices visible, to strip away the obfuscating rhetoric and show clearly that Trump's economic nationalism is a con, that his trade policy is not about bringing back American jobs, but about creating spectacle and controversy that distracts from the upward redistribution of wealth. And we must be equally clear about the alternative, about what a progressive economic agenda would do differently, because it is not enough to critique, we must also construct. A progressive trade policy would be strategic rather than chaotic, would protect workers and the environment through enforceable labor and environmental standards in trade agreements, would use industrial policy to build green industries and good union jobs, would strengthen the social safety net so that workers have the security to demand better wages and conditions. A progressive approach to inflation would address concentration in industries like meatpacking, where a handful of corporations control entire markets and can raise prices at will, would strengthen antitrust enforcement, would use price controls where appropriate, would ensure that the costs of economic transition do not fall disproportionately on those least able to bear them. The senator's conclusion about farmers and ranchers being negatively impacted connects to a broader truth about how Trump's policies hurt the very communities that supported him most strongly. The consequences already rippling through the economy, with prices for fertilizers, tractors, and farm equipment rising, with John Deere, the nation's largest farm machinery maker, saying last month tariffs on steel and aluminum would cost the company $600 million this year, while that cost will be passed on to farmers who already cannot afford the equipment they need to operate. The consolidation continues, the small operations fold, the corporate giants grow larger, and rural America continues its decades-long decline while Republican politicians offer them culture war red meat instead of actual economic assistance. We are at an inflection point historically. We are witnessing in real time the collision between populist rhetoric and plutocratic policy, between promises of economic nationalism and the reality of regressive taxation, between Trump's claims to be fighting for working people and his actual record of making their lives materially harder. The January 2025 transition created this bizarre situation where the final month of the Biden administration ended with inflation at 3.0%, and from January 2021 through January 2025, the Biden administration saw a rise in wages of 19.9% and a rise in prices of 21.5%, with average hourly earnings adjusted for inflation declining by 1.3% during these 4 years. And so Americans felt poorer under Biden because real wages had declined, and they turned to Trump believing his promises to lower costs, and now Trump is implementing policies that will make everything more expensive. The cosmic irony would be funny if it were not so tragic, if real people were not being crushed in the gears of this political economic machine, if families were not making impossible choices about which bills to pay and what food to buy. Trump's erratic tariffs and other policies are already affecting consumers' cost of living and costing businesses real money, with analysts from the Yale Budget Lab expecting an average per-household cost of $2,400 due to tariffs in 2025, and that is money that could have gone to college savings or home repairs or retirement or any of the 1,000 things that would actually improve people's lives, rather than being extracted to fund Trump's delusional trade war. The path forward requires building a political coalition that can break through the right-wing propaganda and connect with working people across racial and regional divides on the basis of shared material interest. that can articulate clearly how progressive policies would tangibly improve their lives, that can offer a compelling vision of shared prosperity rather than the zero-sum nationalist economics that Trump peddles. We need to make people understand that when that senator stands up and calls Trump a liar, when he mocks Trump's gaslighting about prices being imaginary, he is fighting for their ability to afford beef and diapers and a decent life. We need to make people understand that the Republican economic agenda is designed to benefit the wealthy at everyone else's expense, that this is not complicated or hidden, but completely transparent if you look at who pays and who profits. The urgency cannot be overstated, because the economic damage of Trump's tariffs makes a recession more likely, with last week's reciprocal tariff announcement sending stock markets spiraling globally with a 10% drop in the S&P 500 in 2 days, wiping out trillions in market value. And when the recession hits, when unemployment spikes, when businesses fail, working people will bear the brunt as they always do. Trump will blame Democrats and immigrants and China and whoever else is convenient. The right-wing media will amplify his excuses, and unless progressive forces are prepared with a clear counter-narrative that places blame precisely where it belongs, we risk seeing the cycle repeat again. So when you watch that clip, when you hear that senator's righteous anger, when you feel the indignation rising in your chest at the sheer brazen dishonesty of Trump claiming prices are not rising when everyone can see them rising, channel that anger into organizing, into mobilizing, then to building the political power necessary to implement an economic agenda that actually serves working people. The lies will continue. Trump will never stop gaslighting. The conservative media apparatus will never admit the damage their policies cause, but reality has a way of asserting itself eventually, and our job is to be there when it does, with a compelling alternative vision and the political organization to make it real. The fight is now. The stakes could not be higher, and history will judge us by whether we rose to meet this moment with the courage and clarity it demands.